So when I think of traditional evangelism, I think of two different groups. I think of invitation evangelism and I think of outreach evangelism. So just to define those real quick, invitation evangelism would be whenever you invite somebody who's not a Christian to a Christian event. So that could be a church service, that could be some sort of alpha group, which I love the alpha course, Q place, question place groups, all of these things, they're fantastic and they've really, really been beneficial. Billy Graham crusades, obviously there's been a ton of fruit produced in that. So that's one form of the traditional evangelism that I'm talking about. Another form is outreach. Now, outreach evangelism is where we kind of go outside of the four walls of the church, outside of the environment that we would consider to be a little more pure and easier for people to come into and experience God. And we actually go and we meet people where they're at. Outreach evangelism would be things such as street evangelism. A lot of times, outreach evangelism also takes place as we're feeding the poor, as we're providing people with clothing, shelter, different ways that we are oftentimes meeting human needs and bringing the gospel in with that. Both of these types of evangelism have been utilized primarily in the church, in our church history, and they're fantastic. So I'm not going to be picking on them. I will share a couple of areas where I could see the church getting a little off base and some areas that we want to be careful of when we operate in these types of evangelism. And then finally, I want to give the bulk of our time tonight to this concept, power evangelism. So first off, one of the things that I have recognized, even in my personal evangelistic efforts, is that in outreach evangelism, let's focus on that first. In outreach evangelism, there is a temptation to sometimes dilute our own personal morality, purity, or holiness in order to fit in with the group that we're ministering to. Let me give you an example. Let's say that you have a bunch of unsaved friends that were going out to a bar one night. And you really wanted to show them that, hey, guess what? Christians aren't super stuck up. We can let loose and have some fun too. We can have a good time. And so you decide to go with them to the bar. But not only that, you decide, man, they seem to be having a lot of fun drinking. I better keep up with them. I better show them that, hey, I can drink a lot too. Just so that they know that Christians aren't stiffs. And so then what ends up happening? You end up getting drunk as well. So in your effort to maybe relate with non-believers, you have actually compromised your own personal integrity. That is one of the dangers of outreach evangelism like that. Now, this also applies to invitation evangelism and outreach evangelism, this next point. When we begin to dilute the gospel down to just all of the flashy good things that happen to you when you receive Christ, and we don't focus on the other side of the spectrum of the persecution, of the suffering, of holiness and purity and fighting temptation and spiritual attack, all that, we are actually setting people up for failure. So there's been a movement that I've detected called the false grace movement. And this movement basically says, you know what? Jesus' grace covers everything. This is true. A lot of times in heresy, there is some truth. But where they go off is they say that, you know what? You don't really got to worry about your sin too much. It's not really all that big of a deal. Jesus' grace will cover it. Yeah, you can go do that, whatever, not a big deal. The grace of God is bigger than that. And so what they do is they begin to de-emphasize the devastating effects of sin. And oftentimes in our dilution of the gospel, we are only emphasizing the good things that happen when you come to know Christ. And there are plenty. There are amazing, amazing benefits, both in this life and obviously in the life to come from knowing Christ. But if we only share the good things without preparing people for what they will also experience, we are setting them up for failure. In a way, they're going to think that, hey, I was only told that, becoming a Christian would get me a bigger house, a better car, a great spouse. My life would just kind of be perfect. How many of you know that's not the case? And so it's important that we share both sides of the equation here. It's really an act of love for the other person. So, those are just a brief description of some of the traditional ways that Christians have reached the lost. And like I said, we don't want to throw the baby out with the bathwater. There is so many good things, and I embrace and support a lot of these traditional efforts. But I think it's important that we also recognize some of the ways that we could be tripped up as we begin to try and reach the lost.